It seems like nearly all our efforts to get a handle on Alzheimer's and dementia has been utterly useless. An estimated 6 million Americans have Alzheimer's disease, and our projected expectation is that 1 in 10 of us will end up developing it before we die. Like all other chronic diseases in the Western world, its ascent in prevalence within our lifetime has been staggering. And like other chronic diseases, we're seemingly accepting this as normal. Losing your mind is not a natural outcome of losing your youth. In today's episode, I'm going to share what research is showing is working and what is not to prevent and even treat cognitive decline. Hey, Rebels. Welcome to Blasphemous Nutrition. Consider this podcast your pantry full of clarity, perspective, and the nuance needed to counter the superficial health advice so freely given on the internet. I'm Amy, the unapologetically candid host of Blasphemous Nutrition and a double-degreed nutritionist with 20 years experience. I'm here to share a more nuanced take on living and eating well to sustain and recover your health. If you found most health advice to be so generic as to be meaningless, or so extreme that it's unrealistic, and you don't mind the occasional F-bomb, you've come to the right place. From dissecting the latest nutrition trends to breaking down published research and sharing my own clinical experiences, I'm on a mission to foster clarity amidst all the confusion and empower you to have the health you need to live a life you love. Now let's get started. Welcome back to Blasphemous Nutrition. I'm your host, Amy, and I aspire to age like a mashup of Iris Apfel and Ernestine Shepherd. Chances are, if you know of one of these women, you won't know the other. And honestly, I won't be at all surprised if both names are unfamiliar to you. Iris Apfel passed away this year at age 102, and she was a New York fashion icon for decades. If you've ever seen a picture of a crazy-ass looking woman with short white hair and big, thick, round glasses wearing outrageously crazy outfits, that's Iris. Ernestine Shepherd is an 88-year-old competitive bodybuilder who began lifting weights after menopause. And while I've not waited that long to start lifting, I, too, want to be in my late 80s with enough muscle to keep young hooligans thinking twice about fucking around with me. Aging well is more and more a rarity in the English-speaking Western world. In fact, it's so remarkable to age well and intact that my 9-year-old child remarked, "Mom, there are so many old people walking around," the first time he visited a small European town. And this is a child who is not one to usually pick up on the details. Alzheimer's diagnoses and deaths have skyrocketed during our lifetimes. The research focus on eliminating amyloid plaque to cure Alzheimer's has been an utter failure. Despite decades of medication intervention, there is no alleviation of symptoms or remarkable reduction in disease progression. A more recent drug to be approved was rushed to market through an accelerated approval by the FDA, despite research showing a failure in clinical trials. When the clinical trials failed, researchers went back and looked at other factors. They increased the dose of the medication and were able to show a reduction in amyloid plaque, but reducing amyloid plaque has not been proven to have any impact on outcomes that matter, like increasing cognitive capacity or delaying death. And somehow, this reduction in amyloid plaque that showed up on the research got the FDA to put it out on market with loosened safety criteria from clinical trials. But the result of this approval by the FDA actually caused 3 members of the panel to resign after it happened. Now, this new medication costs $56,000 a year, and most of that will end up being paid for by taxpayers through Medicare. And, well, that's just all I'm going to say about that. Incidentally, Europe has refused acceptance of this medication. If you want to hear more about this scandalous story, you can go to my Substack, and I have links to 2 different interviews that discuss the story in more details. The link to my Substack will be in the show notes. Now, Alzheimer's disease develops mainly because of 2 problems in the brain: amyloid plaques and tau tangles. Both of these problems are made worse by inflammation. And inflammation is, the body's way of protecting itself, its response to trouble that, when unresolved, goes from helping to making things worse. A current emerging hypothesis is that Alzheimer's is a disease rooted in chronic inflammation that ends up impacting the brain, leading to structural changes as the brain cells become damaged from the chronic inflammation. Inflammation is our body's way of protecting itself when it senses damage or an invader like a bacteria or a virus. When there's a problem like this, inflammation gets triggered to send help through various immune responses designed to kill invading pathogens and clean up damaged cells. However, in Alzheimer's, this help ends up causing more harm. And it is not because there's inflammation in the first place so much as the inflammation continues out of control. In Alzheimer's, small pieces of a protein called amyloid begin to clump together between brain cells. And these clumps, known as amyloid plaques, are like sticky patches of goo that kind of jam up communication between our brain cells. And then the immune cells of the brain, which are called microglia, they see these plaques and they're like, well, shit, that's not supposed to be there. So then they go in to help clean it up. But the more that the microglia try to remove the plaque and fail, the more that they release additional chemicals to basically call for backup help. And this contributes to ongoing inflammation within the brain. Instead of fixing the problem, this constant state of alarm ends up damaging healthy brain cells, thus making the situation worse. Inside each brain cell, there are these structures that are called microtubules. And microtubules are like these tiny train tracks that transport nutrients and different materials that the cell needs to stay healthy from outside the cell and inside the cell. A protein called tau normally keeps these train tracks straight and stable. But with Alzheimer's, ongoing inflammation in the brain ends up affecting tau proteins, causing them to change their shape and start to stick together. And these tau proteins form tangles inside the brain cells, which then breaks down those microtubule train tracks. And without working train tracks, brain cells cannot get the nutrients that they need, which then leads to cell damage and death. As amyloid plaques build up, they trigger inflammation, and the inflammation doesn't stay put. It spreads throughout the brain, causing even more damage. And it makes the tau proteins more likely to be contangled, and then more brain cells die, and the inflammation keeps increasing because these dead brain cells need to be cleaned up, but the cleanup can't happen, and so we have even more damage. And you see that this creates a vicious cycle. Inflammation leading to more plaques and tangles, which causes more inflammation, which further damages brain cells, and all of this makes the symptoms of Alzheimer's worse. So we can look at Alzheimer's disease as a process where the brain's attempt to protect itself ends up backfiring because it doesn't have what it needs to resolve that inflammation, or the inflammation continues to be triggered, and so there is no opportunity for resolution. And that unresolved inflammation backfires, causing this chain reaction that leads to more and more damage over time. The primary focus on Alzheimer's research and medications has been on removing amyloid plaque. The initial belief was that if we remove the plaque, then the brain could regain function. But going down that path has been an utter failure. We are no better off in finding a cure than we ever have been. And having recently had a family member die with Alzheimer's, I cannot say that any success that may have occurred in slowing her decline and prolonging her life did her any favors. her quality of life continued to decline, and adding extra years to that process, if it even did so, was more cruel than kind. While some researchers are now looking at medications to reduce tau protein formation, I have a feeling this may be barking up the wrong tree next door. Unless chronic inflammation is addressed through lifestyle, I am really dubious that we're going to make any significant headway in our lifetimes. Currently, the lifetime risk for the general population is 10 to 15%. I expect that this is going to increase. Obviously, the older you are, the higher your risk, and 11% of those over 65 already have a diagnosis, and approximately 32% of those who are over 85 years old have the disease. Death from Alzheimer's has increased by 141% in the last 20 years. A damning statistic, further proving that our pharmaceutical interventions have been useless. I don't know about you, but I have no desire to live to be 85 if I'm going to be in a home, unable to recognize my loved ones and unable to feed myself. Fuck that. I know if you have ever watched a family member with this disease decline, you are likely 100% on board with me with this. If the inflammatory roots of Alzheimer's are to be corrected, we need to be looking at what is leading to the chronic inflammation of the body and put out that fire. While there are genetic variances, most notably the ApoE4 gene, that increase your risk of developing Alzheimer's, this only serves as an early warning sign that you need to be extra diligent about staying on top of your health and feeding your brain well. Risk is modifiable, regardless of genetic status. The Lancet Commission on Dementia released a new report this year in 2024, claiming that up to 50% of Alzheimer's can be prevented simply by addressing these modifiable risk factors. And these are what they are. Number 1, if you smoke, stop it. Number 2, stay active through walking, hiking, or any other physical activity. Our body is meant to move, and move we must. Clinically, I see the average step intake among my clients to be about 1,500 to 3,000 steps daily. And we really need to be aiming for at least 7,000 steps as a daily part of your routine. So get up off that desk and go for a walk. Number 3, keep your brain sharp through learning new things. Low education level is a known risk factor for dementia. But honestly, I personally believe that you don't need formal education to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's. What you really need to do is remain curious and continue to learn new things throughout life. I firmly believe this will count in the absence of a formal education. We cannot change what happened, what opportunities we had or did not have in our youth, but we can always choose to step out of our comfort zone and learn new things. And this will force the brain to adapt and grow new connections, new neurons, which will then reduce your risk factor for Alzheimer's and dementia. Number 4, avoid high alcohol consumption. The Lancet Commission states that no more than 12 standard drinks a week should be consumed. And that would be, no more than 12 beers or a 5-ounce glass of wine or 1.5 ounces of hard liquor, right? That's a pretty standard unit. But honestly, I really think it needs to be much, much lower than this. But, they didn't ask me. I don't sit on the Lancet Commission. Canada has recently recommended that all adults limit their alcohol intake to 2 drinks per week or less. And that seems like a good idea to me, especially if you are at higher risk for developing dementia or Alzheimer's. Number 5, maintain normal blood pressure with or without medication. Number 6, Keep your LDL cholesterol in check with or without medication. Number 7, if you are noticing any hearing or vision loss, or you know you have hearing or vision loss, you need to treat that. There is this association with untreated vision and hearing loss, increasing your risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia, especially as you age. I have a feeling this has to do with overall lack of input and stimulation to the brain. When those senses are dialed down a bit, there's just less information coming into the brain and less opportunity for it to maintain and develop new connections. Kind of like an underused muscle atrophies, our brain likely will as well if it is not adapting to new and different stimuli. And this is supported by that educational link to dementia, as well as those suffering from cognitive decline tending to have less and less desire to do new things because it's just so much harder for the brain to process and adapt as the disease gets underway. Number 8, maintain a healthy weight. Both being underweight as well as being overweight increases your risk of Alzheimer's. Number 9, don't get diabetes. If you do have diabetes, keep it very well controlled. Super, super freaking important. Chronically high levels of insulin and glucose is toxic to every aspect of the body, and the brain is no exception. Individuals who have diabetes have a confirmed increased risk of developing dementia, up to 60% greater likelihood. In both diabetes and Alzheimer's, the nerve cells in the brain can become resistant to the effect of insulin. And this can end up leading to that buildup of amyloid and tau protein in the brain. The link between diabetes and Alzheimer's is so strong that Alzheimer's disease is sometimes unofficially called type 3 diabetes. Number 10, treat sleep apnea. And if you think you may have sleep apnea, like you just are chronically tired all the time, you wake up with a dry mouth, your partner says you snore, get yourself assessed. Both lack of oxygen to the brain, if one has apnea, and lack of restful sleep is denying your body the time that it needs to clean up shop. This is when our brain processes and eliminates things it doesn't need. This is when it cleans up shop, right? Does repair work. And if we are not getting restful sleep, nothing in the body works well. Poor sleep also makes weight loss a hell of a lot harder due to changes in appetite and hormones that increase appetite, as well as increasing insulin resistance and glucose levels simply from losing sleep. And it also increases your risk of cardiovascular disease in addition to dementia. Number 11, do what you can to prevent a traumatic brain injury. Always use a helmet when riding a bike, a motorcycle, a horse, a skateboard, or anything else that goes faster than we do. And avoid using your head in football, whether that be American football or otherwise. I would also advise staying clear of any douchebags who have violent proclivities as an additional excellent way to reduce your risk of a traumatic brain injury. Number 12, social isolation is itself a higher risk of developing dementia, but more so later in life. So as millennials and Gen Xers begin to age, it is super, super important for us to stay social. Find a peer group that you enjoy being around, and that's really, really important to your emotional and physical health. So while a healthy lifestyle is critical in avoiding dementia, once it begins to develop, all hope is not lost, despite what our current medical interventions have thus failed to accomplish. In 2014, an utterly groundbreaking clinical study was published by Dale Bredesen and his team, showing for the first time that early onset dementia could be not just slowed, but reversed using dietary and lifestyle intervention. Since that time, a handful of researchers and dedicated clinicians have been working closely and deeply in multimodality clinical trials, showing time and time again that with early intervention, the brain can heal. It needs nutrients and it needs a radical shift in lifestyle to heal, but it can be done. So here's what the body of research is currently showing is important. Because Alzheimer's disease is a systemic and complex disease, there is no one single remedy that can solve it, which is why I think that our pharmaceutical interventions are ultimately going to fall short of being what is needed for this disease, as well as all chronic diseases, because that seems to sort of be the trajectory that we're going down. So if your insulin levels are elevated, it's going to be really, really important to reduce them. That's one thing that the clinical trials are showing is effective and important as part of Alzheimer's treatment. Increasing your omega-3 fatty acid intake has been a part of every successful clinical trial. This is backed by observational research showing that those who consume omega-3 fatty acids, usually through fish in a Mediterranean-style diet, have reduced risk of developing dementia and Alzheimer's. A nutrient-rich diet is also the foundation of these clinical trials. It is high in produce but very limited in carbohydrate. Most of the interventional studies are utilizing a ketogenic diet because this supplies energy to the brain in the form of fats when its ability to utilize carbohydrate is compromised. All of these clinical trials eliminate alcohol. They also focus on maintaining high oral hygiene to reduce harmful bacteria that can travel through the body and damage both the vascular system as well as the brain. It turns out when autopsies are done on individuals with Alzheimer's disease, bacteria that we typically find in the mouth, viruses, these have been found in amyloid plaque. And so as part of these comprehensive clinical trials, maintaining oral hygiene and treating viruses and pathogens is part of the protocol. Now, data from large systematic reviews and meta-analyses suggest that higher adherence to a Mediterranean diet is associated with not only the reduced risk of developing mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, but also reduced risk of progression from mild cognitive impairment to Alzheimer's disease. Some researchers created a hybrid of the DASH diet, which is used to reduce hypertension, and the Mediterranean diet, and then enriched it with berries and leafy green vegetables, which are shown to be beneficial for brain health in the research. And they called this the MIND diet. And those individuals on the MIND diet also showed slower cognitive decline, outperforming the Mediterranean diet, according to some research. This focus on berries and green leafies is the key differentiator here. Research suggests the consumption of leafy greens daily and berries more than twice a week do facilitate preservation of memory beyond the benefits that may be offered by either the Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet alone. Resveratrol is one of the key things here, and that's a polyphenol made by grapes, apples, raspberries, blueberries, plums, peanuts, and most famously, red wine. Scientific reports point to resveratrol having neuroprotective properties, and it protects the neurons and protects the cells of the brain by eliminating oxidative free radicals, reducing those inflammatory markers, those cytokines, and boosting production of anti-inflammatory compounds called IL-10. So while resveratrol has been the reason why wine is considered part of a healthy Mediterranean diet, I would argue that the systemic impact of alcohol on the body and the brain are not worth choosing wine when whole grapes and other dark berries will suffice. Increasing activity and oxygen to the brain through exercise and breathing activities were also part of these comprehensive clinical trials. And this supports brain health through the positive impacts of oxygen on the brain and production of a compound called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a protein that plays a crucial role in the development and maintenance of neurons in the brain. It's also responsible for some of the mood-enhancing impacts of exercise. So we definitely want to boost our BDNF. And so it's also responsible for some of the mood-enhancing impacts of exercise. So this is why we want to move our body. But even if you are unable to move your body through chronic pain or disability, one of the other things that you can do are those breathing activities. This is breath work. There are specific meditations, right, that include breath work. There is some research showing that in addition to exercise, contrast hydrotherapy like hot cold baths or sauna therapy may also support BDNF. So that could also be an option. When I was in London for the personalized medicine conference in June, I listened to a researcher who was working with individuals with mild cognitive impairment using group classes that taught them how to play a flute. And so the flute was the breath work. And then there was this social aspect in addition to learning something new, right? So this is a really creative way that we can meet some of these needs of the brain in a way that can be enjoyable and fun. It doesn't just have to be about exercise, although I will say it's really hard to trump exercise when it comes to systemic benefits across the board. And physical activity has been one of the most longest standing, well-known positive things that we can do to protect our brain as we age. Now, there is also this direct connection between our gut and our brain via the vagus nerve. And it's currently believed that this back and forth communication system exists between the microbiota in the gut and our brain, influencing our cognitive functions and the development of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. As I've talked about this month, the associations between anxiety, depression, and poor gut health are really well established in the research. And the relationship between gut health and dementia has gathered significant interest in recent years, particularly through this concept of the gut-brain axis. An imbalance in gut microbiota can lead to increased gut permeability, systemic inflammation, and that can then negatively impact the blood-brain barrier, causing what some people will call leaky brain. So when the blood-brain barrier is compromised, we get neuroinflammation through this introduction of inflammatory cytokines into the brain from the rest of the body, and this can eventually contribute to neurodegeneration. At this point in research, there are numerous animal studies that support the role of the gut microbiota in cognitive function and Alzheimer's disease, but there's a major lack of human clinical trials. So while gut dysfunction may play a role for many, I don't think at this point addressing gut health alone is likely to resolve most cases of early cognitive decline. Dr. Heather Sanderson worked very closely with Dr. Dale Bredesen at the time that he was doing this initial research that came out in 2014. She's gone on and continued to conduct additional clinical trials. There was one that was published in 2023, just last year, and she was able to show in just 6 months cognitive improvement in 74% of research participants. In this piece of research, they utilized Dale Bredesen's approach, and they put 23 people through a very individualized and intensive treatment plan. 17 of those 23 people had notable improvements in cognitive function. And these results echoed Dr. Bredesen's own research. A follow-up study that he had published in 2022 showed 84% of participants improving their cognitive function over a 9-month time period. This is less than a year. This is less than a year. This kind of blows my mind. You would think after being in this field for 30 years, I would stop being surprised at how freaking amazing the body is and how much nutrition can do. But I'm not. It's just like, it blows my mind. Less than a year. And there are so few medications on the market that treat the brain in any way, any capacity, that can claim improvement of over 50%. So this is, not to be punny, but mind-blowing. Okay, so let's go into the details of these studies a little bit more. In these studies, all participants were given nutrition, movement, and stress reduction education and support. Exercise was recommended based upon what their existing fitness levels were, and they were encouraged to increase and vary their routine. For instance, adding strength training if they were only walking, or beginning to walk if they were straight out sedentary. Now, for stress reduction, it was recommended that people do a chanting style of meditation, mindful acts of kindness, or daily prayer as part of their stress reduction protocol. Nutrition recommendations that yielded these stellar results included a ketogenic diet, high in low carbohydrate produce and fats, in addition to fasting for 12 hours overnight. And participants were encouraged to choose organic produce, wild-caught, low-mercury fish, such as salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring, and consuming organic pastured eggs and poultry, 100% grass-fed meat, and organic dairy. Participants were also asked to eliminate alcohol, processed foods, and all grains during the trial. They wrote down what they ate every day, and these self-reported diet diaries were collected each month, and their blood ketone levels were measured at the clinic each month to confirm adherence. The supplement regimen in these clinical trials is fierce. In Sanderson's clinical trial, baseline nutrition and brain supportive supplements included multiple vitamins and minerals, adaptogenic herbs to reduce the stress response in the body, amino acids for cognitive focus, additional omega-3 fatty acid supplementation, probiotic supplements, CoQ10, and various polyphenols in supplemental form. So each individual in these clinical trials had an personal health workup, and they were assessed for overall toxic burden, like heavy metal exposure, mold exposure. Their hormone health was assessed, a sleep assessment to test for apnea. They took the history of traumatic brain injury, digestive health, and they also tested for various infectious diseases like Lyme disease. All of these factors were considered in their treatment plan, and additional supplements and therapies were added if needed. For instance, if someone was diagnosed with sleep apnea, they were treated for sleep apnea as part of their clinical care in this research assessment. If they tested high for heavy metals, then chelating minerals and nutrients were added to their supplement protocol to help their body chelate and get rid of these heavy metals. So it was very personalized, and this goes without saying, but all medicine should be very personalized because each person is different, right? So while not all the improvements in the Sanderson trial reached statistical significance, there were improvements made across all measurements of concentration, memory, reasoning, and verbal ability. Most notably, memory improvement was the strongest and most significant improvement observed in a 6-month trial. What is emerging from this research is a multimodality plan to reverse early-stage cognitive decline. These are small clinical trials, but if these results continue to be repeated over and over again with different research teams, we will have high-quality evidence that will gather strength of efficacy, and it will outperform anything that Big Pharma comes up for us over the next 20 years. Based on the existing evidence, an unprocessed diet high in lots of vegetables is a foundation of this plan. These foods are high in fiber, which is great for the gut microbiota. They are nutrient loaded, which is great for the brain. And they have loads of polyphenols and antioxidants that help the gut by regulating the intestinal barrier, supporting that beneficial microbiome even further. And that then supports neurotransmitter health and reduces brain inflammation by providing the necessary components to repair DNA damage. A diet high in omega-3 fats from low-mercury seafood and keeping a modest to lower carbohydrate intake is a really good start to preventing cognitive decline. Once mild cognitive impairment is beginning, pulling those carbs back even further and relying more on fat to supply the brain with energy appears to be crucial, as well as addressing all of the contributing factors that were assessed in these clinical trials, like nutrient deficiencies, mold exposure, gut health, hormone health, and sleep quality. Working with a qualified health professional who is skilled in assessing these risk factors or well connected to providers who can help address them is important. Dale Bredesen now trains healthcare providers in his methodology. It is called RECODE, and you can search for providers in your area, including those who do telehealth appointments, to find clinicians who are familiar with and well-trained in his work. Additionally, both Drs. Sanderson and Bredesen have written books about Alzheimer's and what is known about reversing cognitive decline through their research. I strongly recommend both of these books if you have a personal interest in your own brain health or that of a family member and you want to formulate a preventative health plan. I'm looking at doing the RECODE training myself, but I'm still undecided, and because there's so many things that I get interested in. But I can help implement what is written in Dr. Sanderson and Bredesen's book if you need support in that area. Those resources are included in my Substack, which is again linked in the show notes. The best thing that you can do to protect your brain is to move your body, avoid alcohol and tobacco in entirety, and consume an unprocessed diet rich in green veggies, berries, seafoods, and other high-quality proteins. Adding in healthy fat from olive oil, nuts, and seeds, and cold water fish is a must. Going low fat did not do jack for our health like we were told it would. Additionally, neglecting to care for other aspects of your health like poor sleep, gut issues, chronic inflammation, metabolic imbalances, hormone imbalances, right? This will make it harder for you to keep your brain in tip-top shape. So it's really, really important to address these aspects as well. Finally, maintaining valuable friendships and challenging your brain with new things, staying engaged in the world in a meaningful way is also super important to healthy brains as we age. Human beings are social creatures. We need one another. And having community helps us reduce stress, stay sharp, and keep meaning in our lives. Each of us is going to have areas where we're doing really well and areas where we struggle. So shore up and build consistency in the areas that you are already well skilled at. And then reach out and get support if needed to improve the areas that need some work. All right, folks, thanks again for listening to Blasphemous Nutrition. It's been a heck of a month. spending so much time in PubMed and taking a look at brain health and all of the gorgeous nutrients that we can consume to preserve our brains. I hope you have enjoyed listening. If you have, please rate and review Blasphemous Nutrition. If you listen on Spotify, you can leave a comment now as well, which is super exciting. Additionally, if there is someone you know who is concerned about their own brain health, do share this episode or our previous episodes on anxiety, depression, and nutrition with them so that they can be empowered to take better care of their brain. Thanks for listening. Any and all information shared here is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not to be misconstrued as offering medical advice. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a provider-client relationship. Note, I'm not a doctor nor a nurse, and it is imperative that you utilize your brain and your medical team to make the best decisions for your own health. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked to this podcast are at the user's own risk. No information nor resources provided are intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Be a smart human and do not disregard or postpone obtaining medical advice for any medical condition you may have. Seek the assistance of your healthcare team for any such conditions and always do so before making any changes to your medical, nutrition, or health plan.